Now, what is psychotherapy? And how much psychotherapy is needed? The case that comes to my mind occurred I was 10 years old. One summer morning, my father sent me to a nearby village on an errand. As I approached the village, some of my schoolmates saw me and rushed to meet me and tell me, "Joe is back." I didn't have the slightest idea what they meant by "Joe is back." And they very promptly informed me of everything that their parents had told them. Joe was an only child, a son of a farmer. At the age of 12, he was so aggressive, so combative, and so vandalistic that every country school had expelled him and just wouldn't allow him in the school. And Joe had soaked the cat in kerosene and the dog in kerosene and set them on fire. He twice tried to burn down his father's barn and house. And he has said, age 21, a prison-made suit, prison-made shoes, and $10. Of course, he headed for Milwaukee, not far away. There, very shortly, he was arrested by the police for armed robbery and burglary. And was sent to the Young Men's Reformatory at Green Bay, Wisconsin. He served every day of that term. And Green Bay almost always gave good time and short sentences. With Joe, he served his full time. And they released him. Joe went into the town of Green Bay, committed some felonies, was arrested and sent to state prison. There, Joe manifested his dislike of the place. He was 6'3", very powerful young man. And so the warden had him sent down to the dungeon, or in other words, to the hole. The dungeon is 8 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet. Floor is concrete, it slopes toward the front of the dungeon. There's a gutter. Door, a roll-down door, like wood. When I went into the dungeon, she was like soundproof and lightproof. And in the basement, along with a dozen other dungeons, a small hole in the bottom of the door, by which they slip a tray of food in. Sometimes a bowl of water and bread, usually plain prison fare. And Joe stayed in the hole 1 month. Ordinary prisoners who serve a month's time in the hole come out very subdued. Nobody likes to be shut out in the hall. It has no sanitation, provisions, total darkness. And once a week, a hose is inserted and a hole is washed out for sanitation purposes. 1 whole month of that, in 1 month, is enough to tame anybody except Joe. Joe came out and made breakfast was seasoned with yawns. And probably manifested in displeasure by beating up on fellow convicts. So sent to the hole for another 30 days. Usually twice in the hole, you come out stir bugs or psychotic. Psychosis that may last the rest of your life, but usually clears up within a few months. And Joe came out and just as combative, aggressive, vandalistic as before, and spent practically all of that first sentence locked in the hole. And for exercise, 2 guards as big as he, one to the right 10 feet, one to the left by 10 feet, would take Joe out for a walk in the prison exercise yard. The guards were doubled so that they could protect each other. And walking at night alone with 2 guards was his only exercise. After his first term was over, Joe went into the village of Milton and committed a few more felonies. And was promptly arrested and sent back to prison for a second term, which he also served in the hole. At the expiration of that second term in state prison, he came to the village of Lowell, where his parents used to shop, and 3 merchants there. I arrived in the morning, 4th day of Joe's been back. He spent the 3 previous days sending cash register each of the 3 stores, mentally totaling up days monetary take. And each of the stores had been burglarized, and everybody knew Joe did it. There's a motorboat on the river that goes past Lowell, and that had disappeared. And everybody knew that Joe did it. And Joe was 6'3", very well built, a very handsome man. And the 4th morning, the classmates and I gathered around him. He's sitting on a bench under a store awning, staring into space. My schoolmates and I formed a semicircle around him, staring bug-eyed at a real live ex-convict. And Joe was staring into space. 2 miles from the village lived a farmer, his wife and daughter. The farmer owned 200 acres of rich Dodge County farm land, free and clear, and plenty of buildings on it. and he had to have a hired man help him work the farm. And that particular morning, the hired man had received word of a death in the family, so he told the farmer he was quitting, and he probably would not return. And so the farmer knew he had to look for another hired man. He had a daughter, Edie. Edie was an 8th grade graduate. She was 5'10", broad-shouldered, very strong, and she could do as much work as any hired man in the countryside could do. She could butcher a hog, plow a field, pitch hay, corn, grain, do any kind of work. But she was also one of the most excellent cooks in the entire neighborhood. And she was also famous as a dressmaker. She liked to make dresses for little kids, and she made all bridal gowns, and she was always sewing something, and she was extremely popular everywhere. And the community felt very disappointed. And Edie was so well educated, a charming girl, heir to a large farm, so accomplished in everything a farm wife could be accomplished in. But they all thought that Edie was too choosy, and she was raised as a hopeless old maid. Well, that morning, Edie's father was on an errand. Carried out, and he sent Edie to the village on that errand. Edie tied up her horse and buggy, came walking down the street. Joe looked at her curiously. As she approached, Joe stood up and barked her way, and very coolly looked Edie up and down, very thoroughly. And Edie, with perfect poise, stood there and looked Joe up and down very thoroughly. And Joe said, "Can I take you to that next Friday?" At that time in the community, the village of Blow gave a Friday night dance in the town hall. It was a major recreation for the community, and everybody attended. And Edie replied to his question by saying simply, "You can if you are a gentleman." Everybody watched because that encounter between Joe and Edie became very gossip for the community. On Friday evening, Edie drove in, tied up her horse and buggy, and entered the town hall. Joe was waiting for her. Much to the ire of all the young men there, Joe danced every dance with Edie. And Joe was too big. The reputation says no one wanted to challenge him. And the next morning, all three merchants found their stolen goods in boxes in the front door. A motorboat had been returned, and Joe was seen walking down the highway in the direction of Edie's father's farm. As we learned later, Joe applied for the job of hired man. Edie's father, who knew about Joe, said, "Being a hired man is hard work. You work every day of the week, from sun up to long after sundown. You work on Sundays except Sunday morning. You have time off for church. There are no holidays, and you work 7 days a week, sun up to sundown, and it pays $15 a month. And I'll fix up a room for you in the barn. In that area, weather in the winter gets down to 35 degrees below zero. And you can eat in the kitchen with the family." And Joe took the job. Everybody shuddered, wondering what would happen to Edie, her father, and her mother. Within a few months, every farmer wished he had hired Joe. Joe was a perfect hired man. He never seemed to get tired. It never seemed to be too much work. And Joe was a very enthusiastic hired man. So a year passed, and then a frightful buzz of gossip ran over the community one Saturday evening. And the buzz of gossip was Joe was taking Edie out for a buggy ride on a Saturday night. And that was standard procedure for courtship in that community at that time. And so the rumor went Joe was caught as sparking Edie. And next morning, another word of gossip. Joe was seen taking Edie to church on Sunday morning. And that really made it official. Because a young man sparking a girl, if he was serious, took her to church every Sunday. Within 3 months, Joe and Edie were quietly married. Joe moved out of the barn into the main house, and he kept on being his father-in-law's hired man. Joe and Edie had no children. They liked children. Fate denied them any. And Joe, a silent, hard-working man, thoughtful, considerate. Not only did his work, if a neighbor had a broken leg, Joe showed up to do as much as he could to help the neighbor. He never seemed to tire. And though he didn't talk much, everybody liked him. And when the Erickson kid decided to go to high school, the entire community was distressed. And any kid that went to high school was destined to become quote, an educated fool and worthless. And the community thought that I would be a good asset to the community. And going to high school, that's bad. However, Joe looked me out and encouraged me and others to go to high school. And when I announced my intention of going to college, the whole neighborhood was stricken because high school hadn't ruined me. And Joe, however, encouraged me to go to college and encouraged others. And as a result of that, someone as a joke added his name to the school board ballot. And Joe received the largest number of votes, which made him automatically the president of the school board. Every parent in the community attended that school board meeting. And Joe got up and said, "You folks elected me president of this year's school board, and I don't know nothing about school. But I know that all you folks want your kids to grow up, be decent. And I think the best way is to send your kids to school and hire the best teachers and buy the best things the school needs. And don't yell about taxes." The result of that speech was Joe was re-elected school board repeatedly. Now in college, when Joe found out I had a job as state psychologist to work my way through medical school, and Joe told me, as long as you got that job, you'll be visiting Waukesha, young man reformer in prison. And each place is an old record you ought to read. So I knew Joe was giving me his permission for me to read his old records. I read them. And the record at Waukesha was very, very bad. During the years he spent there, he spent most of his time in a strong room, built out of planks. And Joe beat up on the other inmates. He wouldn't cooperate, learning baking as a trade, or taking advantage of any training, and demolished several strong houses. And young man reformatory, Joe had manifested his dislike of being locked up and starting riots in the mess hall, throwing away food, breaking dishes, picking fights. So they finally resorted to locking him in a cell, occasionally letting him exercise in the company of a body of guards. And the state prison, I learned his record there. Even went down to the dungeon. I assure you, in just 5 minutes in that settled my desire for any experimental curiosity. It's a horrible place. And Joe continued. I was hired man. Joe helped to develop the farm and planting trees, rebuilding fences, hog pens, barnyards, and he was very popular in the entire community. Eventually, Edie's parents died, And Joe needed a hired man. He went to Green Bay, told the superintendent his need, and got the names of ex-convicts who served a term there, who might possibly be reformed. Joe began hiring them. Some lasted a day, some a week, some a month, and some for months until he got a head start in the world. And Joe grew older, and so did Edie. And they are a most respected couple. Joe died in his 70s of natural causes. Edie died a few months later. Now, Edie had inherited the farm, and the question of the will interested everybody. The will provided the farm could be sold in total, or it could be sold as a small farm, the extra land being sold off to neighbors who wanted to buy it. And all the money would be turned over to a trust fund administered by a bank and the superintendent of the Young Men's Reformatory. And the money doled out to promising ex-convicts who seemed willing to make good in society, and they received help as long as they deserved it. And so even after death, Joe helped in rehabilitating ex-convicts. Now, that's 29 years of terrible antisocial behavior on Joe's part. And 23-year-old Edie said, "You can if you're a gentleman." And that was Joe's psychotherapy for 29 years of sociopathic behavior. And Joe became a reformed man, a totally different man. And when you look over society, how many men is ruined by being rejected by a girl, was reformed by a girl saying yes, and how many people have some little incident in their life that determines how they live. Now, Joe, despite 29 years of awful behavior, just had a stranger say about 5 words to him, and that was complete psychotherapy. Unpaid for, unsolicited, and just a snappy reply to an impertinent request. And yet it was psychotherapy. So why should anybody spend years and years in psychotherapy? An 8th grade graduate can do it in 5 words. Now, my own experience, Pete had 32 years old, and he'd spent 20 years locked up in correctional and penal institutions. 20 years out of 32 years. Now, when he was released from a state prison, having completed his last prison sentence, Pete came to Phoenix So he'd get drunk, pick up the girl, divorce her, and he got drunk and he went home with her. His mother had two little girls, 10 and 11, and Pete had found somebody who would support him. So he lived with that girl for the next 7 months. Now, Pete was regarded by the halfway house as possibly containing the abilities that would enable him to become a decent citizen. The halfway house was a 7-step foundation sent to me for some psychotherapy. I talked to Joe for an hour. He politely said, "You know where you can stuff that?" Walked out. His girlfriend brought him back, told us, Pete listened politely for another hour, and I said, "You know where you can stuff that?" Walked out. In 7 months, Pete was supported by that girl, had a steady job. Every evening he worked in taverns for drinks as a bouncer. As soon as Pete got drunk, he started fighting. And he usually did so much damage in his fighting at tavern after tavern, discharged him. At the end of the 7 months, his girlfriend got tired of his morning hangovers, his crosses, his condemnation of the two little girls, and irritation toward his girlfriend because he had a hangover. And she lost her temper and kicked Pete out. Pete went around to all the taverns and begged them to hire him. And told him, "Pete, you do too much damage when you get drunk. We don't want you." He went back to the girlfriend's home and begged her for a second chance. And she said no emphatically. No. After Pete had said that he didn't want any more psychotherapy from me, his girlfriend came to see me. She thought maybe I could help her. During the discussion, she expressed irritation with her children, 10 and 11-year-old girls, and she expressed an impatient hope that the two brats would grow up past her and get out on the street and earn their own living. When I asked her, she really meant he wanted her now to grow up, be prostitutes, walking the streets. And she said it was good enough for me, it's good enough for them. And she knew I didn't seem to approve, so she walked out on me. After Pete realized that she'd really kicked him out, he walked the 6 miles from her home to my office. In July, temperature was 109 degrees, and he had a beautiful hangover. The thickest looking man you could ever imagine. He came in and said, "All that stuff you tried to tell me." I told him And in the hour, after listening to me patiently, Pete said, "You know where you stuffed that?" Walked out. Went back to his girlfriend's home, begged her for another chance. He said no. He re-canvassed the taverns, and they all said no. So Pete walked back to my office. That's a total of 18 miles. A beautiful hangover, and a temperature of 109 degrees. He came in, said, "What was that you tried to tell me?" I said, "Sorry, Pete, I've stuffed it." Now, the only thing I can say to you is this. I've got a big backyard. It's fenced in. And there's an old mattress there that you can sleep on. In case it rains, you can pull the mattress under the eaves. If it gets cold, and I don't think it will, I'll furnish you a blanket. And you can sit on the lawn chairs and think things over. And we walked through the side gate. I said, "And if you want me to confiscate your boots so that you won't run away, you'll have to beg me to." And he didn't beg me to. I didn't confiscate his boots. Now that day, my daughter Christina came back from Ann Arbor. And she was interested in going to medical school. She brought with her a 15-year-old granddaughter of mine. And I drove into the carport and saw Pete, new to the waist, sitting on the lawn chair, thinking and feeling sorry for himself. And Christina came to the house and said, "Who's that strange man in your backyard? New to the waist, who looks so miserable, and with a great big scar on his chest?" I said, "I don't know anything about the scar, but it happened to be Pete, one of my patients. He's sitting there thinking over the question of alcoholism." And she said, "May I talk to him?" I said, "Certainly, of course." My granddaughter, I bugged out of the thought of seeing a real live ex-convict went along. Two girls went out, talked to Pete, and Pete was even lonesome and miserable and sorry for himself. He did want a sympathetic shoulder to lean on. I talked, and he told two girls his life story, much of which I don't know. And finally, as evening approached, and daughter asked him, "What would you like for dinner tonight, Pete?" Pete said, "I'd like a pint, but I'm sure I won't get that." And Christina laughed and said, "No, you won't get a pint, but I'll get you a nice dinner." Christina's a gourmet cook. She went all out to give Pete a nice dinner. Food such as he never had to eat in all his life. And I say that the two girls questioned Pete. And Pete welcomed their company. And they learned a lot about convicts our behavior, their life. And Pete's scar across his chest, he explained, while he was committing a burglary, and police officer shot him in the heart. He was rushed to an emergency ward and did open heart surgery on him, extracted the bullet from his heart and sewed it up. And my daughter, trying to go to medical school, insisted there must be something wrong with his heartbeat, its cardiac function. And Pete said his heart was as good as new. And Pete, because he talked to granddaughter, my daughter, got gourmet breakfast and dinners every day. On the fourth day, Pete asked my permission to go to his girlfriend's home. He explained he had an old junker of a car standing in her driveway, and he was sure he could fix it up and sell it for $25. I had no right to keep Pete in my backyard. I knew he was an alcoholic and a criminal. I couldn't keep him there legally, so I gave him permission. And Pete, later that evening, came home, came to my backyard, $25 in his pocket. He said he picked up the car and sold her. And he had the $25 he showed to me. Next morning, he asked me permission to go out and look for work. He came back with 2 job offers. One, wrangling horses, a job he liked, but not regular, as a low pay. The other was a hard factory job, steady, well paid. So Pete said he'd like to have the little night in my backyard to think things over. Next morning he asked me if he could go to work at the factory job, explaining the $25 he had in his pocket would pay for a cheap room he could live on. Hamburgers, hot dogs, pork and beans, until his first paycheck came in. To my knowledge, Pete has been sober, hard-working for 5 years now. The first Thursday he was out, he called his girlfriend and put on your hat. You're going with me. He said, I am not. What makes you think you're going to take me somewhere? And Pete said, you're going to go with me even if I have to carry you the whole way. And she said, where do you think you want to take me? Pete said, we're both going to Alcoholics Anonymous. You need it as bad as I do. So they both began attending AA regularly. After 2 weeks, Pete joined the group, and in his maiden speech, all members of AA have to get up and tell their life history. As part of the ceremony of joining AA, and Pete got up for his maiden speech and said, any old bum No matter how drunk and how worthless he is, can get sober and stay sober. All he needs is a backyard launching pad. So there, the only really therapeutic thing I said, I went through the side gate to the backyard. I said, if you want to confiscate your boots, you have to beg me to. Now, my working in prisons in Wisconsin had taught me all about convict honor. And I knew that when I said that to him, I was placing him on convict honor not to run away. Now, how much psychotherapy do you need to do? You know, Pete, for 20 years, locked up, 20 years out of his 32 years of life, suddenly became a good citizen. I think, of course, my daughter's curiosity, granddaughter's curiosity, helped years later. And daughter came home from medical school and said, Daddy, I want to examine Pete's heart. I called up Pete. He came right away. And she gave him heart tests, examination, blood pressure, and so on, in the most thoroughgoing fashion. Before exercise, after exercise, standing up, lying down on his back, lying down on his stomach, sitting up, before and after exercise. And he said, you're right, Pete. Your heart is sound and blood pressure normal. Pete said, I could have told you that to begin with. And I did tell you it was all right. He said, you're right, Pete. In the bedroom wall there hangs a picture of the buffalo dancer, an Indian picture. Pete dropped by one day to give it to me. And it's a very nice picture. It's hanging on the wall in my bedroom. Pete had talent and ability. And only an appeal to his convict honor. That's all the psychotherapy he needed. You know, when Pete straightened out, his girlfriend came back to me for a couple of interviews. And now he just can't wait for her daughter to get through high school so she can send them to business school so they can get secretarial jobs. You know, they're a very complete case of psychotherapy. I didn't try psychoanalysis, guitar, transactional analysis, existentialism, ESC, or anything. I just gave him permission to use my backyard as a thinking place.
Sounds like your daughter and granddaughter helped a little bit too.
Oh, I enjoyed that. Every morning I came to the office. Pete did something say to me. He told me my daughter and granddaughter didn't belong on this earth because they were so unlike any girls he had ever met in the past. It just don't belong on this planet. And of course, in the backyard, got basset hound. And we dog sit for my school teacher's son, with a school teacher wife. Sarah Lee comes over every school day, and we dog sit her. And Pete named her Shortstop. He admired her, and Shortstop climbed up that pillowberry tree out on that side trunk. Pete said to get an elevated view of life. And he really did admire that basset hound. And Shortstop is always enthusiastic about everything she does, and she does like to be petted. Now, another example of short-term therapy. It isn't so much what the therapist does as what he gets his patient to do. A classmate of mine saw me, said his mother and sister and her sister lived in Milwaukee. Both were independently wealthy, and his aunt had a great big home, a great big yard, 52 years old, unmarried, totally friendless. He went to church. Regularly. He sat by herself. He didn't speak to the Episcopalian minister. He didn't speak to any of the parishioners. And he went to church on every possible occasion. She had a housekeeper and a maid who came in each morning, did the housework, prepared the meals, washed the dishes, and then in the evening left. Housekeeper bought supplies, paid the yard man, and keep the yard looking beautiful. And that woman lived alone in a great big house. And my classmate told me my aunt had been profoundly depressed for 9 months. The housekeeper's worried about her, so is the maid. She and my mother won't speak to each other. He has no friends and just goes to church. She likes me. She can't stand too frequent visits from me. Once a year is about all she can take. And I'm worried about her. Now, on one of your lecture trips to Milwaukee, will you look her up and see if you can do anything for her? One evening, I rapped at her door. Housekeeper maid long departed. I identified myself and demanded that I be given a tour of the house. And she passively agreed. I went from one room to another, inspecting, hoping I'd find something and I could use. And in the sunroom, I saw 3 African violets in full bloom, different colors. And in the 4th spot, I thought she had planted a leaf. You know, African violets are propagated by planting leaves. And here this depressed woman, passively walking through the house, showing it room by room to a stranger, and didn't care about it at all. I saw those 3 adult African violets and the third one being sprouted. I said, Madam, in accord with your son's wishes, I'm going to write some prescriptions for you, and I want them carried out. You give these prescriptions to your housekeeper tomorrow morning. Have her carry them out. I prescribed them, and the housekeeper buy her an adult African violet of every hue that she did not own. I think at that time there were 13 different hues. And then she would buy 50 potting pots and a supply of soil from the nursery so she could plant some more African violet leaves and start growing African violets. And I also asked the housekeeper buy 200 gift flower pots. And my orders were, every time a baby was born to a member of the church, he sent the baby an adult African violet. Every time a baby got christened, she sent an adult African violet. Every time a church member got sick, that member got an adult African violet. Every time a girl announced her engagement, she got an African violet. Every couple that was married in church got an African violet. At every church bazaar, she contributed 12 to 20 African violets to be sold. Every possible opportunity she was given African violet. At one time, I know she had over 200 adult African violets. Now, I was thinking she had really accomplished something. You kept a single African violet plant alive and in full bloom for 3 years, and they are the tenderest of plants, and they will die of the faintest excuse. Light has to be just right. The amount of water given them just right. And taking care of 200 or more African violets in a day's work, it doesn't give you a chance to shed a tear. You're busy from early morning till late at night. And so, some 20 years later, he died of natural causes. With an endless number of friends, the African violet queen of Milwaukee just wanted to seeing just one place where he still had energy, and then capitalizing on that energy and spreading it over everything. And you can't give a beautiful African violet to people without arousing a good feeling toward you. He had plenty of friends of all ages. At the church's Christmas party, there were always African pilots. The old, young, the sick, the well, newly born, newly christened, newly married, is a wonderful outlet for her. And she really didn't have time to feel depressed. I saw her only once. Psychotherapy is treating a patient as an individual who is unique and never be a duplicate of that person. And you use the uniqueness of that person. That person possesses a lot of unknown qualities. I discovered she liked African pilots. I promoted in liking that she already had. Now another African pilot episode, not African pilots were involved. A rancher that was newly married, his bride developed severe arthritis. It was sort of a wedding present. And he took her around various doctors for treatment. And of course, the future in arthritis is not good. And he had generalized arthritis. And she wanted to become pregnant. The obstetrician measured her and told her she could have a baby, but that if she got pregnant, her arthritis might come worse. The baby might be born dead. You might not be able to deliver it. The orthopedist who was treating her agreed with the obstetrician. And one became more and more depressed at home. And the rancher began putting knives, and Anthony committed suicide out of reach. And while he was more and more depressed, took her to a psychiatrist who suggested electric shock, insulin shock. And we asked him about the results of the arthritis. Our comments were not favorable. There was a choice between straightening his wife's mind out and damaging her body. He didn't want either. He finally brought her to me. I listened to her mournful story. I told her, well, apparently, getting pregnant is the most important thing there is in your life. It may make your arthritis worse. The obstetrician's right. You may not be able to deliver the baby. In that case, a cesarean can be done. But go ahead and get pregnant. So she took my advice very gladly, got pregnant. Her arthritis improved. He delivered a baby girl named Cynthia. And she was so very, very happy with that baby. He was the nicest baby in the whole world. Unfortunately, at the age of 6 months, Cynthia died a crib death, of which there's no explanation. She became more depressed and suicidal. Arthritis got worse. He took her around with various psychiatrists, orthopedists, and they all counseled against any further pregnancies. Her arthritis had become so severe, and finally he brought her to me. And I told her, now listen, Wilma, I think you're being very stupid. I wanted her attention. I think you're being very stupid. For 9 long months, you carried Cynthia, and you enjoyed every second of those 9 long months. And you delivered Cynthia, and you enjoyed that fact very much. Very proud of it. And you enjoyed Cynthia as a living baby for 6 long months. And now you tell me you want to wipe out those 15 months of happiness? I think that's a stupid thing to do. 15 months of glorious happiness should not be thrown away. It should be treasured. And I'm going to tell you a way of treasuring it. Plant a eucalyptus sapling. They grow very rapidly in Arizona. And you name that eucalyptus sapling Cynthia. You look forward to the day when you can sit and crochet and knit in the presence of Cynthia, in the shade of Cynthia. I went out a year later. I see her. Cynthia was growing very rapidly. Her arthritis was greatly improved, and he took me around, showing me her flower beds. Her flower beds were larger than this whole building. And her arthritis was very much improved. And she had devoted her life to growing flowers, blossoms, different kinds, in different seasons. I went home with an armful of sweet peas. And she still had her memories. 15 long months of very happy memories. Why do any more therapy with her? She had a purpose in life. She was growing more flowers than she could use. I got an armful. I didn't inquire how she disposed of other flowers. She was a very generously natured woman. I think she's supplied a lot of people with flowers. And when you get your patient involved in doing something, and they discover that you're not afraid insulting them and telling them the simple truth, I thought it was stupid to throw away those memories of Cynthia. She should belong with. I think short-term therapy can be extremely useful. But you have to make that short-term therapy useful to the personality. Now there's another topic and becoming more and more recognized, and that's the matter of incest. And I treated a patient conditions successfully. She went on to visit her parents in California, and she happened to run across a high school friend. I don't know how much she learned about the high school friend. And she told her friend about me. So enthusiastic, the friend came to me. He took me to Orleans, and I don't suppose you want to see me, Dr. Erickson. As it were, she got the kind of ridiculous idea. I did want to see her. And he came in. He said her story was too horrible to tell me. I told her he couldn't tell me anything I hadn't heard before, and I was still surviving. And so, reluctantly, she told me how her father had raped her as a 6-year-old girl and had continued to use her regularly for sexual purposes until she was 17. And during those years, she felt unclean, inferior, ashamed, a horrible feeling of shame, inferiority, of being a filthy object, to be scorned, if I'm going to school terrible. And at 17, she managed to break away from her father, got a job as a waitress, and he thought maybe she had a high school diploma. She'd feel better about herself. And he worked her way through high school. And her diploma didn't make her feel any better about herself. So she worked her way through college, got a BA degree, and he still felt soiled, inferior, shameful, undesirable, and life was very miserable. And she had a strong urge to live. So she worked her way through a master's degree, hoping I would give her some self-respect. But it didn't. She enrolled in a doctoral program. But in college, in graduate school, men had propositioned her often. And that made her feel terribly inferior. And so while working on a doctorate, being propositioned, he simply gave up. He was an inferior creature, good only, worth only to satisfy men's sexual desires. And so she became a prostitute. And some men came along, offered her a home to live with him. She's a very beautiful girl. And she explained, you have to live. You don't want to live in terror of the police. This man offered me a home, shelter, food, clothes. I accepted. I didn't enjoy sex. I hated it. There's nothing in the world I'm more afraid of than an erect penis. I'm afraid of it. I'm terrified. I'm completely passive. I can't make any response at all and just feel soiled. and dirty. And you got to live. You gotta have food and clothes and shelter. And when that man dropped me, another man picked me up. I was passive, ashamed, inferior, but you got to live. When you got tired of me, another man picked me up. Now that you know my story, I know you won't want to have anything to do with me. And I told him, I was interested in your story. And you said, I had no interest in you, no use for you. I'm realizing how utterly stupid you are. How utterly stupid you are. And you are stupid. Now you stop to think. You say you're afraid of a erect penis. And so brave, so bold, and penetrate the female body with such force. And you're passive. And you don't seem to realize that you have a vagina. And with a vagina, the biggest, boldest, bravest penis can be reduced to a helpless, dangling object very promptly. You go back to LA and find out for yourself and take a vicious pleasure in reducing an erect penis to a helpless, dangling object. And take a vicious pleasure in it. He went back and took a vicious pleasure in reducing a penis. And he did get a vicious pleasure. He tried another man, got vicious pleasure. And the third man, and she suddenly realized she was having pleasure. And she realized nothing inferior about her. No, she be enrolled for a doctoral degree. Is now a PhD in counseling. And she knows that her vagina can conquer any penis in the world easily and pleasurably. He came back to report to me and said, I'm all through with men. I'm going to be a nice, sweet virgin until the right man comes along. All I did was have her look at the other side of the coin. And she knew I was right. And I told her I have a vicious pleasure, because that made pleasure sound bad. I had two words, vicious pleasure. And so she took vicious pleasure and found pleasure was much better than viciousness. So why don't people think about things in reality as they are? These mothers who come in with uncontrollable children, a 200-pound woman, big and brawny, truck driver type, all muscle and bone, able to hold her own with any truck driver. And get pregnant and give birth to a 6-pound baby. The uterus is the strongest muscle in the human body. A 200-pound woman, all muscle, and pound on that 6-pound baby for 10, 20, 30 hours in giving birth. And that 6-pound baby and live through 10, 20, 30 hours of pounding, and it is pounding, and live. And why does anybody, any grown woman say, I can't handle this 4-year-old child? She ought to realize she's bigger, she's older, she's stronger, she's smarter, she's had more experience, and she can throw the kid to the floor and sit on him until he gets to the light of day. And in the collection paper, I wrote up the identification of a secure reality. Now they're only 250 pounds, 150 pounds. And an 8-year-old son of hers who had terrified the neighborhood, she sat on that bucking horse all day. Found out riding that bucking horse is hard work. And toward the end of the day, he realized that he was not the all-powerful force in the world. He had met his match.
But how did you persuade her to do that?
It took a usually 200-pound woman pounding a 6-pound baby illustrate. And so she sat on him for half an hour while he wiggled and squirmed and tried to get loose. She would know she's in a battle, and if she wasn't careful, she'd lose the battle. But he found out that there is a secure reality. There is more power than he had. Now the question comes up, how do you make patients develop rapport with you? Yeah. A patient should have a faithful attitude toward the therapist. And many a patient comes in antagonist. Now, what do you do? My teaching is, whatever the patient brings in, use it. And don't be afraid to use it. Now, Jim, a very idealistic young man, his high school sweetheart, a very highly idealistic girl. And they were looking forward to getting married. And the Vietnam War came along, and Jim was drafted. He went to Vietnam in a non-combat unit. He had his back broken, his spine severed, in a truck accident, and shipped back to the Veterans Hospital. And as a result of that broken back, Jim suffered from convulsions of pain at about the average of every 5 minutes. He had a violent convulsion of pain, night and day. All the nurses felt sorry for him, so did the doctors. And they told him they'd build up him physically and operate on him and relieve his pain. So Jim endured his pain. I ate and ate to build up his strength. His sleep was poor. Those convulsive pain was severe exercise. It would wear him down. Finally, he'd gained enough weight so he could withstand the operation. Operated on him. And when he recovered from anesthetic, he found the pain was the same, if not worse. Operation was a failure. And you can imagine how disappointed Jim was and how disappointed his sweetheart and Gracie was. Because Gracie had insisted on marrying him as soon as he came back. And that self-sacrificing idealism. Surgeon built up Jim's courage, and he underwent another operation to cure his pain. He came out of anesthetic. He found he had as much pain as ever, or perhaps more. And he had all of the discomfort occasioned by the operation. And Jim and Grace were pretty angry about that. The chief surgeon took them in his confidence with his medical and surgical books. He gave them full details on the third operation, which might leave Jim in pain. And Jim and Grace were hard to convince. The surgeon was very kind and very thoughtful and very dedicated. And finally, Jim was built up for a third operation. But either Jim or Grace heard something about hypnosis and me. And told the surgeon before the operation they were going to see me about hypnosis. And the surgeon, being very concerned about them, was going to his office. And he explained very seriously and earnestly that hypnosis was pure humbug, witchcraft, black magic, fraudulent, useless. He told them I was a fraud. I'd be locked up in prison for robbing innocent people, my fraudulent claims. Jim and Gracie, of course, high school graduate, are very impressed by the chief surgeon's hospital, seeking that much interest in them. But nevertheless, he stubbornly insists on seeing me first. And despite the surgeon's warnings, and they'd come to see me. As Grace pushed Jim's wheelchair into my room, looks on their faces, hostile, resentful, a little bit of hope, a lot of fear, anxiety, distrust. Their facial expression said, if there's any way you can get away from these people, take anything to get out of their reach. And they were so desperate, so hostile, with only a little bit of hope on their face. So while Gracie stood behind Jim's chair, I listened to their story, and they told it in an antagonistic way. So you don't believe in hypnosis. You think humbug, black magic, witchcraft, a fraud. Gracie, stand to that rug right there. You stand up straight. Look straight ahead. And don't move off that rug. Jim, here's a heavy oak cane. If you take it, if you see me doing anything wrong, cover me with it. Jim took hold of that cane, looking at me, and turned to Grace and said, Grace, I'm going to do something to you that you won't like, Jim won't like. I'm going to keep doing it until you go into a deep trance. I know you don't know what hypnosis is. You don't know what I mean by deep trance. And in the back of your mind are understandings that you don't know about. And those understandings that you don't know about will be able to let you go into a deep trance. I picked up my bamboo cane and put it upon her cleavage and started separating her blouse to expose her bra. And Grace blushed, so her eyes closed. You went into a deep trance, a very deep trance. And I said, where are you, Grace? She said, here. Her mind, here with me. Who else is here? Nobody. And so I asked her about her high school, year she graduated, named for some of her friends in high school. A lot of meaningless questions. I lifted up her arm with one finger and left it cataleptic in midair. Now this time Jim had relaxed his hold on the cane. And he was staring at Grace. And I said to Jim, talk to Grace. Jim said, Gracie, Gracie, Gracie. And I began yelling at her. And don't you realize, Jim? He can't hear you. He's in a trance. And then I lowered Grace's arm to her side, told Jim to lift her hand. Jim tried to, and Grace was not reproving. He kept her hand where I told her it should be. And then I told him to lift one finger, put it down again with one finger. At that time, Jim was a believer. I said, Grace, open your eyes, remain asleep, and walk from that rug over there to that chair and sit down in the chair and close your eyes and continue in the trance. Continue a minute or a minute and a half, then wake up and start wondering. He said, he said, what's happened? I was standing over there. How did I get to this chair? Jim said, you walked. He said, I did not. I was saying that rug. How did I get here? You walked. I did not. I was saying that rug. How did I get here? And Jim realized that he had no memory, no understanding. I said, Jim, I've been taking things slow and easy. He told me your story in the first 10 minutes. He had a lot of convulsions of pain. I are telling the story. And you've been free of pain for 20 minutes. He looked at his watch. I didn't know we would hear that long. And he had a convulsion of pain. And he didn't like the convulsion. He said, no, I sure didn't have nothing. And you don't like those convulsions. And you are free of pain for 20 minutes. And you want to be free of pain? Jim said, yes. I said, all right, Jim. You look at Grace. Grace, you look at Jim. And Jim wanted looking at Grace. Grace is going to go into a trance. And you're going to follow her into a trance. Grace's eyes slowly closed, so did Jim's. I explained to them that pain is a warning signal. It should be treated like an alarm clock. Hear the alarm, turn it off, go about your day's business. You don't turn the alarm back on, nor do you let it keep ringing. Turn it off. I talked to Jim and Grace, explaining and re-explaining that concept. And they left. And I thought they really understood. He went back to the Veterans Hospital, went to the chief surgeon's office, opened the door, and for about an hour, Jim and Grace bawled out that chief surgeon. You said hypnosis humbuggery as witchcraft, like magic, worthless, a fraud. And here you see me. I'm free of pain. And you can tell I'm not having convulsions of pain. And you watch me day after day, week after week, in pain and agony. And you had the nerve to say the hypnosis is a fraud. Now you can see that I'm free of pain. And you call Dr. Erickson a fraud. You said he ought to be in prison. And 1 hour I spent with him has done me more good than all the weeks I've been here and the 2 operations I've had here. And Grace and Jim took out their anger very thoroughly, verbally. And the next night I noticed the surgeon slept into my class and took notes very assiduously. I saw Jim and Grace a few more times. Just make certain that Grace knew how I would talk about pain. And I went to their home. The government had given Jim 15 acres of land, money to build a house, and a tractor to run the farm. And Jim said he was going to help build his home. Jim was very skillful with his hands. He made a lot of homemade jewelry. He put on the market and sold. He learned to climb up on a tractor, could be operated by hand. He plowed his land, planted his crops, harvested them. And at first, every 2 months, he'd come up, as his parents in the Army had been. For a certain condition, you get booster shots. You come up saying, I think it's about time for a booster shot. I don't want that pain to return. I put him in trance along with Grace, and then I began stretching their visits to 3 months and the 6 months. I began using the telephone. I gave booster shots over the telephone. And finally I realized that if the occasion arose, they would call me. Jim fell off the tractor and broke his hip. He called me from a hospital and said, "No, a good orthopedic surgeon. I've got to have my hip repaired." I told him. Jim went through that operation. Later, he broke his leg in 4 places. Those were operated on, patched up. Jim didn't have any pain. Jim and Grace wanted to have a baby. Grace got pregnant 6 times and miscarried each time the first 2 months. Our obstetrician and consultants advised Grace, "We don't think you can carry a baby to term, and we would advise that you adopt one." And they wrote to me. I sponsored the adoption. Read it.
Award of Honorary Grandparents is bestowed on Dr. and Mrs. Milton Erickson by Slade Nathan, son of Jim and Gracie, in honor of Slade's adoption anniversary, September 12, 77. Sealed and approved with a special stamp of approval. Age 2.
And now I'm sponsoring them for the adoption of a second child. And of course, I had Jim plant a eucalyptus tree, watch it grow, and anticipate the time when Jim, when Slade Nathan would climb that tree. And they planted some peach trees and some apricot trees too. I think that's a wonderful keepsake. I may have 25 fraction grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. I've got quite a lot of honorary grandchildren.
don't understand why the pain went away.
It's-
I don't understand why the pain went away, and um, I don't understand what happened except that you made him attend to something interesting to him, and he forgot about the pain. And then your explanation of the alarm, I don't understand, and I want to understand it a little better.
All right, let me tell you something of your own experience. I'll tell you something of your own experience. And you can know I'm telling you the truth. You can't get through college not having some professors lecture to you, and you're not interested in the lecture. You wish the old buzzard would drop dead of heart rate. And you're sitting in a hard wooden chair. Your bottom hurts. Your back hurts. Your arms hurt. And still the old buzzard drones on, and you couldn't care less about what he's saying. You know, get through college, you've got to listen to the old buzzard. And you look at the clock, and the hands seem to be moving too slowly. And when the lecture finally ends, you get up, smooth out your bottom, straighten out your body, and get rid of pain. You've had that experience, haven't you? And you felt real pain too, didn't you? And the next day you sat in that same chair, and the lecturer was thrilling to listen to. And you couldn't be more interested in what he was saying than possibly more interest. You hung on every word, and the clock seemed to be whizzing around. At the end of the hour, it seemed like only 5 minutes. Your bottom didn't hurt. When your attention is misdirected or directed elsewhere, you don't feel pain. I remember in college, I sat opposite a banquet to a very pretty girl. She's a nice, sweet, simple girl, very pretty. We found out ice cream was dessert. He was elated. He said, I like ice cream. I adore it. I can eat by the quart. I said to her, wouldn't it be a shame if when your ice cream was served, if somebody else ate it? And I kept her attention on what I was saying. Ate her ice cream and mine. I never saw a madder girl in my life. So I had to date her and take her out and feed her some ice cream. But then I wanted to date her anyway.
If you way to get a date.
Yes, it was easy.
Just to look at the other side of the coin, do you believe that it's necessary to feel the pain of grief or loss or whatever? I mean, let's say somebody came in and was mourning over the loss of a close loved one. and you could distract them from it by having them focus on something else. Would that be a time that you wouldn't want to redirect their attention, but you'd want them to work through the pain?
Why endure pain? Is it really necessary?
That's what I'm asking. That's what we're taught.
My son Robert was 7 years old. He and a truck tried to use the street at the same time. And he lost. Police picked me up to identify, and the boy was throwing paper in his pocket named Bobby on it. I looked at Robert in the Samaritan Hospital. Told me, yes, that's my son. And I asked the doctor, what's in the emergency room? What's the damage? He said, both thighs are broken. Pelvis is fractured. Skull is fractured. He has a concussion. You're taking him for internal injuries at the present time. I waited until I told him he had no internal injuries, just superficial scratches. Then I asked him, what's the prognosis? And the doctor said, well, if he lives 48 hours, he may have a chance to live. I went home, called all the family together and said, we all know Robert. You know that when Robert has to do something, he does it. He does it very well. Now, at the present time, Robert is in Good Samaritan Hospital. A truck ran over him, broke both his legs, and fractured his pelvis, fractured his skull, and bumped his brain so bad. And he has what is called a concussion. So he doesn't know anybody. He can't think straight. And we'll have to wait 48 hours before we know if Robert will live. And we all know Robert. He does things. He does them well. You can always take pride in what Robert does. Now, if you want to shed a couple of tears, it's all right. But I think be very disrespectful of Robert. He did a lot of crying. Out of respect for Robert, I think you ought to do all your home chores. I think you ought to eat a good supper. I think you ought to do all your homework. And I want you to go to bed on time, go to sleep on time, and sleep restfully all night. You owe Robert that respect. A couple of kids shed a couple of tears and washed dishes and all and chores, ate a good meal, and they ate well, did their homework, went to bed on time, and to sleep on time. And in 48 hours, we knew that Robert was going to live. I told them all Yeah, we ought to leave Robert alone in the hospital where he had a very hard job. Had him that is getting well. We went over and visited him and take a lot of his energy. And he needed that energy to get well. I didn't know it. My wife would slip over to the hospital every day. I'll get him, sit down quietly by the bed. Sometimes Robert would turn over and turn his back to her. Sometimes he'd tell her to go home. Sometimes he'd ask her a question or two, and then tell her to go home. He did whatever he told her to. You sent Robert plenty of presents. He always had the nurse deliver them. He never gave anything personally. I'd go into the nurse's station and look through the window of the nurse's station so I could see how Robert was getting along. Robert didn't know I was there. Now, the accident happened on December 5th, and Robert came home from the hospital in a body cast late in March. Such a man who brought him in the house almost dropped him, and Robert was very excited. As he brought him in the living room, Robert said, "I'm so glad I got parents like you. Never once did you come to the hospital. And all the other poor kids, our parents came every afternoon and made them cry. And then they'd come every evening, make the poor kid cry again. And on Sundays it was awful. I just hated those parents who wouldn't let their kids get well." Does that answer your question? Yeah, during my internship, I took the temperature, breathing rate, pulse, an hour before patients received their visitors. An hour after the visitors left, I took their pulse, respiration, and blood pressure. Every time the patient had a visitor, he had a rise in temperature. Our breathing rate became exaggerated, and our blood pressure increased. I made up my mind then, if I ever had children or a wife in the hospital, I wouldn't visit until I knew it'd be safe for their blood pressure, their heart rate, their breathing, their temperature. And patients in the hospital need to use their strength to get well and not to make their relatives who are well and healthy feel better.
What did you say to your son? How did he understand that you're not coming to the hospital? Did you say to him that he needed the strength to get better?
Well, 7, Robert, reasonably bright. And you could see how parental visits made all the other kids on that ward cry.
Are you saying that you never saw him for 3 months, 4 months?
I looked at him through the nurse's station.
But he had no contact with you, no conversation with you at all?
Oh, when his mother came in, sit down beside him,
His mother, she was there, but not you.
Robert would say, "Go home." And she went home.
Okay, what if Robert had expressed a wish for you to be there? He said he wanted you there. Would you have been there?
I would have visited him and told him very briefly and clearly, in small boy language, why I didn't like to visit him.
What would you have said?
I explained to him, now I've come to see you, your heart is beating faster, your blood pressure is higher, you're beating faster, you're using up a lot of your strength to talk to me, strength you ought to put into your broken legs.
What about visiting him and using some of your hypnosis on him to help him get better faster?
My kids didn't live with me all our lives without learning something.
You didn't need it.
And I taught the kids the unimportance of pain, the importance of physical comfort. For example, when Roxana scratched her knee, and she was really announcing it to the whole city. Her mother came out, looked at it, so did I, and Mother said, "Mother will kiss it here and here, and then right on top, so all the pain will go away."
Yeah.
It's marvelous
Oh,
how
it works.
anesthetic
It's perfect.
a mother's kiss.
A mother's kiss can cure anything.
That's right, I'll do.
Well, the Erickson household has its own laws of behavior. Betty fell down the basement steps, and, well, she might have been 9 years old at the time. Betty house was in the basement. I looked at her mother falling down the basement stairs, and Betty picked herself up. Betty Alice said, "Why did you do that, Mama?" And Betty explained later, "For a moment I felt intense rage. Then I saw how humorous it was. And I laughed about it." And all our kids are trained that way.
What about adults in the hospital when it gets so boring? Do you feel the same way about adults?
Or someone who's dying.
And loneliness. How about that?
Yeah, adults. Well, a workman, construction man, fell 40 stories, wound up completely paralyzed except he had use of his arms. And that permanent, that was for life. And you wanted to know what to do about his painful situation. I said, there isn't much you can really do. You can develop calluses. He knew what calluses are on your pain nerves. That way you won't feel the pain so much. And life will be very boring. So have your friends bring you cartoons, comic books, and the nurse will furnish you paste and scissors, and you make scrapbooks of cartoons and jokes, funny sayings. You can really amuse yourself thoroughly making those scrapbooks. Every time one of your fellow workmen lands in the hospital sitting in a scrapbook, so you made I don't know how many hundred scrapbooks. And our milkman, who delivered milk every morning, had a basset dog who said the milkman had no right to be there. And he raised an awful uproar. And the milkman always made sure that the back gate was shut before